Christian, do you have any question or Professor Di Prampero for Moren?
Yeah, I have just one. And what about the possibility, in your opinion, JB, to assess a single training session by using the acceleration speed profile, just to understand which kind of training stimulus you give during the specific session?
So it's very important, because my answer will be yes and no. It depends on the content of the session. So I have seen some sessions like, let's say, 1 hour, okay? I have seen some sessions where in 1 hour, because of small-sided games, because of tactical instructions by the coach, people only reach one part of the cloud. Very high acceleration, but not maximum speed, or vice versa. And I have seen some sessions where, like simulated games, half times in real football, I have seen some complete profiles from A0 to S0. So I would say, if the session is providing enough stimulus to get both maximum acceleration and maximum speed, then yes, it's enough. And this is why when I did my trial for myself, because I trust the data I generate most of the time, I tried to be as intense as possible in the specific football context. So I did some acceleration, some runs. It was like a game. I felt like when I was playing football myself. So I would say, yes, it's enough if the content of the session covers the entire spectrum. If not, you have to cumulate several different sessions to be sure to have something consistent.
So JB, maybe the best idea could be to draw the cloud of points, just to understand where you worked during the training session without plotting a profile, probably.
Absolutely, because I think this is something I presented in the previous webinar, so people can see that slide where we have 8 training sessions, and when you see the cloud of data, they have a different shape. Some of them go down in a triangle down to top speed, some of them do not. And so yes, it could be a good idea. But in my opinion, I would say, if it's not close to the game demand, then very likely one session is not enough. This is how I would summarize things.
Yes.
Just for you to know, I have seen several data of elite professional football entire game. It works. In an entire game of data, the players cover the entire spectrum. So I guess I think it's the minimum dose of data you need for something accurate.
Okay, I have a second one. Then probably we can pick up the question from the chat. And it's about the speed specific training. So what do you think about the weekly periodization? So it is better is it better in your opinion to train the speed in a single day of the week, or it's better to split the overall volume you want to do in different days?
That could be a scenario for a wonderful scientific study. Honestly, that could be great, because there is no academic research answer to that. But my personal experience and opinion is that we are not made for running fast. We are not made for sprinting. We are made for running slow, just like we are not made for swimming. So if you want your body to improve in that task it's not made for, I think there should be a regular small stimulus often, rather than big chunks of stimulus that will give you DOMs and muscle pains and so on. So let's say if you have a volume of, I don't know, in a typical football context, if you have a volume of 10 sprints per week, I think it's better to have 2 here and there rather than 2 times 5 or 1 time 10. This is an opinion, and this is a feeling of practical experience.
I agree 100%. So Andrea, what about the question in the chat?
Okay, I will publish only some of them, but at the end of the webinar, we try to answer to all of them. So, because I saw that there is also some question directly from the Botter work, so I will make a selection with your help. So let's see the first question from Marco. Okay. The reason why we can see data point near to the A0 point is only because soccer players never sprint from a static position.
Exactly, in my opinion. Exactly. But when you do the thing that is very important is that people need to remember that the x-axis is not time or distance. The x-axis is speed. And you need to remember that after 1 second of a standing start sprint, you already have more than 5 meters per second of speed. So you should not think that because there is no points on the left side of the AS profile, it was a running start. No. If you look at the acceleration speed of a single sprint, you will not see points there, just because when you push on one leg to start, your center of mass is already almost 3 meters per second. You know, so it's just a problem of what is on the x-axis that is changing your view of things. What is on the x-axis is not time or distance; it is speed. So part of the answer is because of that. There is never a static start in football, but if you do a static start, you will not see points close to A0 either. Just remember that when someone goes off the starting blocks, their velocity of the center of mass is already something around 3 meters per second. So that's why you have no points close to A0.
Okay, thank you. Now the other one is from Mattia. How was the profile made before giving the green light for a return to play?
I can only speak for the things I know. There was no profile made for the green light. You know, very, very, very often the green light is just, is the protocol that was planned completed? Yes, no. How many sessions? 10. Okay. You know, the what's up question. What's up today? I'm fine. No pain. Let's go. Sometimes there is an isokinetic testing. Sometimes there is manual or strength testing. But I am not aware of context in our studies where the green light was based on the profile. So it's always after the green light of the doctors and the physiotherapists that we do a sprint profile. And then we observe that things are not back to normal. You see what I mean? I mean, all the people in the audience working with elite football or rugby players actually know where the green light comes from. It is not very often very objective.
Thank you, JB. From Jordan, JB, can
Yes.
you explain if F0 means the same or not to A0?
Yes, conceptually they are exactly the same, because when you start a sprint, the maximum force output in the horizontal direction is expressed in newtons per kilogram of body mass. This is equal to mass multiplied by acceleration plus the friction force. So this is basic sprint mechanics from Giovanni Cavagna and so on, and Newton. And so if you think of it, at the beginning of the sprint, there is no friction. So there is a direct equivalence between F in the horizontal direction and A in the horizontal direction. The only difference is body mass. So if I have 8 newtons per kilo, my F0 is 8 newtons per kilo, my A0 is 8 meters per second square. Be careful, it's a theoretical value, okay? I may not be able to reach that value, but my system has this capacity.
Thank you. Hi, Carl. This is the question from Carl. What's about overspeed training?
Yes, so this is a key question, because if you look at the scientific literature so far, there is plenty of data on overspeed, but it's always acute studies. What happens when you pull someone? The training studies, to my knowledge, there's only 2 training studies using overspeed. One was from Johan Latti last year. And I will summarize my thinking. We observed that overspeed was not working for every player on the team. It was with professional rugby players. And we also observed that it was only working to improve top speed in the players who had a low V0 at the beginning, but not in the high V0s. But my fundamental opinion is that overspeed is something artificial. It takes you out of the theoretical profile. High resistances let you within the theoretical profile, but overspeed takes you to somewhere that is artificial. So in my opinion, the first thing that should be done is a correct maximum speed training. And if this is done correctly, then yes, you may think about overspeed. But the final comment of overspeed to me is something very, very fascinating. Think about it. When you pull someone, it means when you give to their system an extra horizontal force, we are all able to run faster. But we are not able to provide ourselves with this extra horizontal force. Because if I was able to generate myself these 30, 50 newtons constantly in the horizontal direction, then I would run as fast as during overspeed. So overspeed to me is a very interesting, intriguing method. But I think it's wrong to think that if I get your body fast artificially, then you will be faster when there is no artificial extra force. I think it's a shortcut.
Thank you. The next one. Any experience with using ASP with LPS at 1000 Hertz and comparing training to max speed testing and that relationship?
So I don't have direct experience with that, but if the LPS system is good and it's really 1000 Hertz, then yes, the speed and position data will be accurate, so you can use that. And again, if you can export your LPS system time, speed, acceleration data, you can just click and generate something on the website we've created and verify for yourself. But in all the studies trying to validate GPS data, LPS is very often used as a reference. So I guess theoretically it should be possible, but you only need to check.
Thanks. Otmar, can you use the curves of injury prevention or detecting exhaustion?
Injury prevention, I will say no, definitely, because if this is the case, someone will get rich and this is impossible. So we don't say prevention, we say information. So definitely you should use the curve to inform what is the player experiencing. For example, if you have an A0 of 8 and for some reasons for 2 or 3 weeks you go down to 6, there is something happening. And so prevention is being aware that something is happening in the player's sprinting capacity. Then detecting exhaustion, yes, definitely. I would be very happy to see some data on how the profile changes over the season, how the profile changes over repeated games in 3 days. Like, for example, in the French Rugby Championship in a few days now, some players will play more than 5 games in less than 2 weeks, which is crazy. So definitely, yes, we could see if the fatigue is related to a change in the profile. So I would say, yes, definitely that could be used for that.
How would you introduce the force speed training to improve this profile in a weekly soccer microcycle?
I don't know. It's the question is pretty unclear. What I would do is that first I would check the effect of my microcycle. Don't know what it exactly means, but anyway, let's say it's a cycle of work of 3 weeks like this, and I can check how the players respond to this microcycle before, after. So I do 1 week of control, my microcycle, and I do a week of training that's very similar to the first one, so I can compare what's comparable. This is retrospective information. Now, to orient the microcycle, it all depends on what you want to do. Do you want the entire team to work on something? Because you've seen that everybody was lacking acceleration or speed during the game. Do you want some players to improve something? So this needs a much deeper discussion. But yes, to observe the effect of your microcycle, as you have seen, this is great. I mean, let's say you think that overspeed will work for the players. Fine. You do 1 week of control, you do an overspeed microcycle, and you do a week of control back to see who improved what. This is an example of use.
Thank you.
Gilbert, I have another one on my side because I think that my colleagues here in Italy in football, the fitness coaches here are a little bit scared to work with heavy sleds. So how can we convince them that this is the right way to work on the left side of the profile?
That's an interesting question, because it's a question I asked myself. Yeah, but now what I think really right now, I can tell you, if you think that you need to convince them, it's already too late. Because no, it's you will not. It's not because you show them 2,000 studies showing the same thing, very likely. So what you need to ask them is how they consider their strength work for sprinting, discuss that, and then the only thing you need to do is ask them to try sometime. Because mechanically speaking, you can explain the overload, then you can show the results, you can show maybe in a few years a meta-analysis of the literature. But if it's a solid opinion that they have, it will not change very likely with science. Unfortunately, I would love to, but my experience is that things are really, really deeply anchored. So the only way is to discuss with them about strength training and try to put the arguments there and to try. Because in my own experience, I would say that more than 80% of the coaches who are really definitively afraid by this type of strength training have never done that themselves, or have never tried that with their players. On the opposite, people who tried, people who use it regularly, have a totally different opinion. So I'm definitely not a pro heavy sled. I think mechanically speaking, it's a very, very sensical way to overload the sprint pattern.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. That's from Malte. Is there a higher risk of injury if you expose a player to a football training just to create a V profile rather than exposing him to control and well-progressed sprint training conditioning before including him into football training session?
That's a very interesting question. I don't know how to answer that so directly, but this is very, very interesting, because that's two ways of considering the return to sport process. One is controlling a lot, but without specificity. The other one is putting the players in more chaos, but with specificity. And sorry for that, but my answer will be a mix of both. It will be get the player ready to sprint correctly and safely with, let's say, a more sprint training oriented program in priority, and then ask them to go and play, because at the end of the day, they are football players. So that's something they need to do. I don't know if the risk of re-injury is higher. All I know is that, and this is something we've shown with Jordan Mendiguccia, when the rehabilitation is oriented towards the future task of sprinting, it gives much less re-injuries than if it's a isolated 3 exercises protocol. That's something we know. So that's a mix of both answers.
Thank you.
But for sure, sorry to complete, but for sure, I think if you do a rehab and take the players back to their maximum specific game demands, sometimes you have no choice. When there's a big final or a big game, you have to get the player on the pitch. But if you go directly from the rehab room to the stadium, that's going to be risky. But sometimes you have no choice.
From Adam, when trying to train the F0, how light is heavy enough load for sprint force improvements? Is it max strength, non-ballistic, or need to be heavily ballistic?
The beginning of the question is pretty fun, because we don't really know, and it depends on the level of the player. As I always say, if you give me a young somebody who has never played, or a low-level player, anything will improve their force for sure. But at some point, if you want to target the maximum force output with results, our studies show that you need to go at least over a load that slows you down by 50%, which is, depending on the surface and depending on the sled, something for sure heavier than 70-80% of body mass. But then I always tell people this: if you want people to improve their strength at the squat, or at the press, or at the bench press, at the gym, do you consider using light loads? Never. Physiologically, it's impossible to use light loads and improve maximum force output in trained people, I mean. So that gives the answer to the question. So, and again, ballistic to me is systematic. Ballistic is by default. Ballistic means we want the maximum speed in tension every time, and this should be done systematically. So if you have an intention of slow movement, it is not neuromuscular training. If your intention is to be slow, and you should do something else. Your intention should be always to be as fast as possible, but the load will make you slow.
What precautions should be used in increasing maximum force with young players between 13 and 18 years old?
So we open a book here to answer that question. I really advise people to read the works of Rodri Lloyd from England and his colleagues, because they did a fantastic work on that topic. And of course, that should be precautions that make sense, like progressivity, load, technique, positions, and so on. But I think that maximum force work at that age can be done starting from isometrics and starting from things that are safe in terms of range of motion and all that stuff. But it should be done, because I think it's a major component of performance. So of course, you will not put a 30-year-old football player under a half squat that's super heavy, but you can start with isometrics. You can go progressively using the precautions that you will use for anybody, I think.
Thank you. Okay. Do you have any information regarding the HDOP and the total of satellites connected with the GNSS for the acceleration velocity profile data that you have collected?
So this is a question that Christian will answer, but it is the main question before everything else. These are the metrics of the quality of the GPS system data. And this is what will explain some, let's say, good data and some wrong data. So Christian, that's your turn.
Usually the quality of the signal is given by the number of satellites that are connected to the device and the HDOP. But so it's very easy to answer to this question, because the system on average receive about 10 satellites, and the HDOP is more or less 1 or below 1. But the main point in our experience is the signal to noise ratio. which give us the quality of the signal instead of the number of satellites connected. So we usually are below 200, above, sorry, 350 about the parameter of signal to noise ratio. So this is our experience. And with the new devices, I think we will have further parameters to get better the quality of the signal received. So there is, I think, if I remember well, the speed accuracy. There are more parameters to be sure that the data collected is good enough to plot the profile we want to plot.
Okay. All right. Instead of using the overspeed, can we use resistance like using elastics? Of course, every player will have a specific elastic with a specific resistance, because with professional players, we observe a very good progression and instant good result.
Yeah, but here we are discussing of overspeed versus resistance. So it's totally different objectives. But elastic resistance to me is interesting because it's cheap and very accessible, so very easy to use. And yes, it may have some results. The only thing is that you don't exactly control. Well, you can easily measure the force output in the elastic, of course, but you don't control exactly the load. But one thing that you can control is the speed. So if you measure the speed, you know indirectly the resistance. So for example, if you have me sprint with an elastic and I run at 50% of my maximum speed at the end, because what's important is that with an elastic resistance, the resistance is changing continuously. It is not a fixed resistance because it depends on the length of the elastic. So it's a variable resistance. But if you monitor my end speed before I stop, you have an idea of the maximum force that was produced. But it's a total different way to provide resistance compared to sleds. But I think it's very interesting because it allows you to accelerate, to sprint fast before the resistance occurs. So you see what I mean? So it's a good way, for example, to work on the force capability at high speed. Except that contrary to the heavy sleds that occur at low speed.
Okay, Christian, hai qualche domanda?
Yes, I have another one, Joby. Is there any device in your knowledge that we can use instead of the sled to give a resistance to the player? Because I'm always thinking about a kind of isokinetic cable that maybe is more interesting because allow the player to reach immediately the target speed, and then you push at your maximums at the specific speed you selected.
Yes, so basically you have some pulley devices that exist, but you cannot do that, obviously. You can use also robotic devices. So to my knowledge, two of them exist on the market. One is the 1080 Motion Sprint, and the other one is the Dynaspeed from Muscle Labs. And they both allow you to do that. They both allow you to generate the amount of resistance you want and start the resistance at some points into the sprint. So you can do that, but because of the robotic assistance, it's pretty expensive, but it's the best way to do it.
And are they able to give you enough resistance, let's say similar to a very heavy sled?
So I don't know the Dynaspeed device very much, but the 1080 Motion allows you to go up to 30 kilos horizontally, which more or less corresponds to 100 kilo on the sled, which is obviously it's not enough to stop a professional rugby player, but it's enough to stop many athletes. And I've seen, for example, in the club we work with in Grenoble, they use two devices in parallel to provide twice this load. So yes, with these machines, you can go to impossible movement. So you can reach very, very high loads.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The time for questions it's over, but you can write to us through the website when we will publish on the video will be published on YouTube. So we can use several channels in order to get in contact. So we would like to say thank you to you, Maureen.
Thank you, guys.
Professor Di Prampero and Christian for your time, for all the work he's behind this. As you said, easy is not the same as simple. So also for a webinar that looks to be very, very easy to do because you sit there and you watch, but there is a lot of work every time, every minute spent here. So thank you again, everybody, you and all the attendees that were today at the webinar.
Thank you very much. And
Bye-bye.
keep innovating. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.
Speriamo di vederti qui a Udine nel prossimo futuro.
Lo spero anche io.
A presto.
Ciao.
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 Ciao, grazie.